Tangling with the Night Watch, exploring the Caspian Sea, post-pirate politics. All this and more in today's episode.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, guys, I have an awesome interview today. We dive into real history and how you can use those situations in your existing RPG campaigns today, if need be. Here's the interview. My guest today is the writer and game designer behind the Molten Sulfur blog, Tristan Zimmerman. Tristan, welcome back to the show, man.
Matt, you know, it's always a delight to be here.
Oh, absolutely. It's just so much fun to get to talk to you. And we always talk about fascinating historical topics that people can use in their campaigns and RPG sessions. So let's just dive into it. So yeah. I know we usually try to cover 3. We usually go long, but we'll see what's going to happen. Well, we're going to talk about the Caspian Sea, some exploration or something there with a twist around the Caspian Sea. And then we're going to talk about some post-pirate politics in a seaport. But first, we're going to talk about the Night Watch. Now, for old school Babylon 5 fans, you know, they don't have to get too excited because we're not going to talk about that Night Watch. But we're going to talk about the Night Watch. Now, this is a topic that I think is quite interesting because this is something where we tend to put on our 21st century modern day glasses when we're looking at kind of creating a pseudo Middle Ages world. And we just kind of superimpose that onto the past or something like that, right? This is one of those cases where we kind of need to step out of our modern selves, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the 21st century, police are just kind of ubiquitous in both the developed and the developing world. Like everywhere does police, and police are recognizably the same thing. But societies are complicated and societies are varied, and there have been a lot of different ways that cities have handled police-like functions down through history and in different parts of the globe. And because of the ubiquity of police, it can be very hard for us to imagine what that looks like. What does a world look like where there aren't police? And the Night Watch, which to me, you say Babylon 5, to me, Night Watch is Ankh-Morpork in Discworld. Okay, but the Night Watch is a way that medieval and broadly pre-industrial Europe and colonial America handled some very interesting problems that were specific to their needs as a culture. So I think that this is really cool from a world building perspective in your Dungeons and Dragons, but also it has some cool possibilities for adventures and twists in your fictional campaigns if you incorporate a Night Watch like force. So to start with, why do you need a Night Watch? And to look at that, you first have to wrap your head around the idea that in a pre-industrial world, nights are dark because light is expensive. You can light the night with candles of tallow or beeswax, but those are animal products. And as with everything animal in a pre-industrial world, if you raise it yourself, it's a lot of work, which means it's available in limited quantities. If you pay someone else to do it, it's very expensive. So you can't have that many candles. Maybe you prefer to use oil lamps, which in medieval and pre-industrial Europe and colonial America, you're probably filling your oil lamps with flaxseed oil or olive oil. You run into the exact same problem. It's labor intensive. So it's either very limited in how much you have or it's very expensive. Maybe you use firewood or you burn dried animal dung. Same problem. It's labor intensive to produce. So you either have very little of it or it's very expensive, which means that you produce as little light at night as you can get away with, which means nobody goes out of doors at night. In this era that we're talking about, most people, when it gets dark, they went inside their houses, they barred the door so no one could get in, and they did not go outside again until morning. And people, for the most part, just did not walk about at night. Now, we might think, oh, that's because of wild animals or brigands. Sure, but a bigger problem is falling into holes and breaking your neck. So people just didn't go around after dark. The problem with that is that medieval cities were tinderboxes. Entire blocks of cities would burn down every year. And if you have an entire, as much as 18 hours a day in the middle of winter in Northern Europe when nobody's outside, well, what happens when a fire starts? You might not notice until it's burned down several buildings. So you need people who are intentionally outside to keep an eye out for fires and to raise an alarm. Furthermore, if there's nobody outside, thieves have full run of the night. So the Night Watch was an institution created to deal with these two problems: fire and theft. And the first night watches seem to have begun as citizens' brigades. We might think of them as being comparable to jury duty, where each able-bodied male resident was assigned to patrol the streets so many nights a year. And as early as 1150 in Paris, the guilds were responsible for providing watchmen to patrol the streets and keep an eye out for fires, raise an alarm if they did see a fire so everybody could know to rush outside and help put out the fire, and to try to apprehend any thieves that they saw. Sentinels would sit in church towers, in the steeples, and keep an eye out for fires from up there. Amsterdam during this time was so big that actually 4 different steeples were needed to monitor the whole town. But there was a problem with all this, which is that the work is unpleasant, right? It's cold at night. You might, even if you're carrying a lantern, you can fall. Somebody leaves the door to their cellar open and you don't notice it. Congratulations. You just fell into an open cellar. You break your neck and you die. And so people tried to get out of this work. And pretty quickly, wealthy people stopped doing night watch. They hire substitutes. If you can afford to hire a substitute to take on your jury duty, essentially, you do it. And over time, first off, night watches are spreading to more cities. And they're professionalizing, right? It's less, we all got to pitch in so many nights a year. Instead, you're paying people to do it. Cities are paying people to do it. The problem is the pay is garbage. And the work is not any more pleasant. So what you wind up with is the people doing this work tend to be people who don't have much choice. So it's older folks, it's younger folks, it's sickly folks, it's poor people. And a lot of these people are also holding down jobs during the daytime, because if you're desperate enough to be a night watchman, you're probably also desperate enough to be utterly sleep deprived as you're working during the day and during the night. So these people are not good at their jobs, right? And that's something that we see in the sources from these periods, is that generally speaking, few people have a high opinion of night watchmen. Night watchmen are looked down upon as kind of an incompetent force. But hey, you don't have to be particularly competent to be like, oh, there's a fire, everybody rush out. There's some other weird stuff that night watchmen are doing. In a lot of cities, night watchmen have the responsibility of making sure that everybody's doors are locked or barred. That way thieves can't get in. Well, how do you check if somebody's door is locked or barred? You'd walk up to their house and you try to open the door. Right. So they're wandering the streets trying to open everybody's doors in the middle of the night. They're also giving the time. In a lot of cities, they're walking through the night, giving sing-song rhymes, telling what time it is. And these sing-song rhymes may also like give advice or promote Christian values. And it blows my mind that you are trying to sleep, right? It's 2 a.m. You're trying to sleep. You can't go outside because you'll break your neck. And every hour, somebody's sleep-deprived 14-year-old servant is walking by your window and singing loudly about how it's 2 a.m. And then he's rattling your door to make sure it's barred. Like, how does anybody get any sleep in these towns? And that's, in fact, part of the point is in a lot of these cities, night watchmen were supposed to help encourage everyone to be light sleepers, because if you're a light sleeper, it's less likely you'll be robbed and it's more likely you'll notice a fire. So everybody's sleeping badly, which just doesn't sound like a great idea to me. But it's really important to recognize that these are highly localized phenomena. Many cities do not have a night watch. In fact, Dublin doesn't have a night watch until the year 1677. Berlin doesn't have one until the early 1600s, so they're not universal. And the most larger cities do have them. And each city puts its own spin on the night watch. So, for example, in the 1400s in Venice, there was a professional watch that guarded the town. Or I shouldn't say guarded, I should say monitored. And then there was a separate non-professional volunteer watch that just watched the shipyards. And this watch was drawn from the shipbuilders. So you had 2 watches, one professional, one amateur. In France, in the town of Saint-Malo in the early 1600s, they didn't bother with the fire prevention aspect of it. Saint-Malo was a walled town, and they would just release a pack of hungry mastiffs into town every night. And they couldn't get out because of the walls. And the dogs were garbage at notifying people of fires, but they straight up ate thieves. And boy, that's a way to do it. The sizes of these watches varied a lot, whether whether each individual patrolman patrolled the entire city, or whether you had particular beats, or if you just guarded your own neighborhood, would vary. Most watchmen in different cities carried a lantern on a stick, but in Norway and Denmark, watchmen carried morning stars, those spiked clubs. Mm-hmm. In Stockholm, night watchmen carried man traps, those kind of hooped, grabby things on the ends of long poles. In Amsterdam, watchmen famously carried a rattle in one hand to serve as an alarm, and a pike in the other hand. And in the American colonies, night watchmen often carried guns for fear of American Indians. And as far as I was able to determine, that's really the only place where night watchmen carried firearms. And just to add fun, in Paris, the watchmen rode on horseback. And yeah, it's a totally different way of handling law enforcement, not least because law enforcement is the secondary duty. The primary duty remains fire is very bad. Fire is much worse than thieves. So I think that it's a really fun spin to use in your fictional campaign, the campaign you're already running, whether it's medieval fantasy or not, right? What's important is that this is an institution that is a good fit for the problems that its society is facing. And I think that it can be really fun to have your law enforcement be professional in scare quotes at best, or generally reviled, though there are some cities in the United States, or just generally be not super concerned about law enforcement. In fact, just one fun little anecdote that I'll close us out with. In 1635, in a city in Denmark that I'm going to mispronounce as Navestad, two watchmen ran afoul of a group of journeyman shoemakers who were out after dark, and the shoemakers all drew knives and chased after the watchmen, shouting, "Kill them! Kill them!" These two watchmen, run all the way to the mayor's house and drag him out of bed to make the mayor save their lives. And at your table, like, cool, that's when the PCs show up, right? The PCs are just rolling into town late at night. And what's the first thing you encounter when you're in this town? Here's this bleary-eyed mayor standing on his front stoop in front of a gang of presumably drunken apprentice shoemakers waving knives and screaming for the blood of these two night watchmen who are cowering behind the mayor. And yeah, I think it's really fun and really suitable for gaming.
Yeah, and maybe they got tired of that 2 a.m. and all's well kind of stuff.
God, can you imagine?
Yeah, no, I think this is really interesting because I think for a long time, especially when I was younger, I think I just, when I would play in a fantasy world, I just put basically police in the city, right? Like I just put like what I knew as police in the city. And I think that was, the more, of course, that I think about it, and some years back, I had started thinking about it. So when I saw you had written about this topic on your blog, I thought it was really interesting because we do tend to just kind of put our own experience kind of over top and without thinking about some of the other possibilities, right? Because setting up a night watch like this opens a ton of different story, ideas and story, hooks and things like that. And instead of, and it also lends itself to a more dynamic world than just, we have police, just like would be in our world, right? Because we're in a different world. It would make sense that there would be something different. And I really do like the idea that they were there to prevent fires and not necessarily to enforce laws, or that they're checking doors. Late at night, it would be interesting to have one check the door of where the PCs are staying to see what happened if they had forgotten to lock the door. I mean, there's just all kinds of interesting things you can do with this. So it is really cool.
Yeah, and then when the PCs are woken up because they forgot to bar the door because they're new in the city, right? They're not accustomed to the concept of the night watch, or like in character, they're not accustomed to it. Yeah. So they didn't know, like, oh, make sure you bar the door. Who is it who's accosting them and being like, oh, you need to make sure, that's a fine for you, or I'm just going to yell at you. Like it's the blacksmith. It's the guy that they were haggling with over the price of a sword earlier in the day because it's his day for jury duty. Or, okay, well, you've been in town for a week now, guys. You pulled the short straw, like you got to patrol the neighborhood tonight. Them's the rules. And, you're patrolling the neighborhood and you notice, hey, that somebody's skulking around over there. Nobody's supposed to be out of bed after dark, but oh my goodness, at the same time, like, is that a fire I hear 2 streets over? I can't really see the glow yet, but it sure sounds like a crackling fire. Which do we check out? And yeah, I think it will make an experience that's different from what your players are used to. And I'm all about those novel experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you're saying there, I mean, it would be interesting just to be like, the PCs show up in town and they're like, oh yeah, we have some kind of job here and we'll have to stay a week. And it would be interesting to have, somebody show up and be like, well, if you're here longer than 2 days, you have to pull a shift on night watch. And you're like, wait, what? We have to do a shift. And you're just like, yeah, somebody has to do a shift. And that would be a way just to introduce all kinds of cool stuff, that's going on. And I mean, I just think it's interesting too, that, it just puts us in a different place to think about, some cities, the city your PCs may be in might be kind of like a near anarchy state, right? It may, there may be, people who break into houses and there's not much, recourse against that. There might be some other things that go on and there's not much recourse because, the normal people, right? The average everyday person is just like, hey man, I'm a blacksmith. I'm a shoemaker. I'm a baker. I'm just trying to get by, and they're not handling some of this. So it's also an interesting way to, just to show, the PCs just different experiences and different. So I think it's great.
Yeah, in much of the pre-industrial Western world, property crimes were not seen as the responsibility of the state. They were seen as the responsibility of the individuals involved. So if somebody burgled your house, well, okay, the night watchman is out and about, and maybe he'll catch the burglar, but probably not. If somebody stole your cow, right? Mm-hmm. That's not something that not only is that not something that you turn to the police for, there isn't a police to turn to. That's just not how this works. Yeah. Instead, if it's something that really matters to you, you personally need to go find your cow. You personally need to figure out who stole your cow. And then you personally need to go to a magistrate and say, it was William. It was William up the street. He has my cow. Make him give the cow back, and whatever the penalty for theft is. And then it's up to the magistrate to be like, okay, William, what's your side of the story? And different places and different times had different laws or different absences of laws, and in some cases, it may have been a very Baroque affair with, laws and traditions and blah, blah, blah. And in other cases, it may have just been kind of like the people's court, right? Where it's just like, all right, I'm the magistrate. I am the magistrate, not necessarily because I have a lot of legal training or anything, but just because I'm the biggest local landowner and I'm going to declare what I think is the right call here. And all of this is enormously variable across time and across location. And yeah, I guess the bottom line is don't feel shackled to what you personally have experienced in your 21st century life, because crime and punishment and law have an enormous diversity in ways that they have been applied throughout history and across geographic space.
Yeah, absolutely. And and like you said there, I mean, I think it just works whether you're doing kind of a medieval setting or whether you're doing anything else, really. I mean, you could even make it work in a modern day setting where where you have a state of conflict or something around the globe, and this situation might exist, and you can do it on a frontier planet at the edge of space, right? At the edge of known space or whatever, because they just haven't had time to import a whole police force, right? It's prospectors and a few scientists who are in a town, and we don't have a professional police force, right? Because that's just the way kind of things go like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. To generalize it, ultimately, laws and judicial action are about resolving disputes between people, right? And the dispute could be, person A says, you stole my cow. Person B says, no, I didn't. Well, we have to resolve this dispute. And, or it could be something as big as, you killed my wife. No, I didn't. That's a dispute that needs to be resolved. And resolving disputes is adventure, right? Mm-hmm. Every different way that you can think of to how disputes can be resolved, like there is room for adventure in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, and you could take it so many different ways. I think of, and if people are doing this, right, of course, you introduce the idea of perhaps there's even a mob, right? And so you throw the PCs into a situation where a mob is bringing somebody to, let's put it in quotes, right, justice, and the PCs are forced with some kind of choice here, as if if this is really what happened or not what happened. I mean, you can do so much with this, let alone just having the PC show up in a city where people are robbing or burglarizing people with almost impunity because there is no law enforcement. It just opens up a world of possibilities. So I think this is a really neat thing. And I think it is, like I said, too, it's one of the things that we sometimes forget about because we just, we just set up a city and we just assume we know kind of what cities look like because we live in a city or something like that in present day. So I think that's really cool. Yeah. And, but now we are going to kind of switch gears here and head over to the Caspian Sea. But there are some strange going-ons here, isn't there?
Yeah. So the Caspian Sea, first for those who aren't familiar with the Caspian Sea is a saltwater sea. It is landlocked. It is not connected to any other body of salt water. It's located on the western edge of Central Asia. So it's bordered by Iran to the south, and it's bordered by Russia to the north. And then you've got kind of the stands, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, etc., to the east. And then on the west side, you find nations like Azerbaijan and Armenia. And some of these nations that I'm mentioning don't directly border the Caspian, but I'm just giving for reference. And the Caspian Sea was on the edge of the Hellenistic world. The Hellenistic world, this is the pre-Roman world brought about by the conquests of Alexander the Great, right? Alexander conquers this enormous empire that immediately upon his death falls apart into multiple kingdoms. But all these kingdoms are in contact with one another, and they all have a culturally Greek upper class. And it's this really interesting period of a globalized world that stretches from Greece and Egypt to the west, all the way to the Indus River in modern day Pakistan to the east. And the Caspian Sea is on the edge of the Hellenistic world. And so we're looking at this guy named Patrocles. Now, Patrocles was an officer and geographer in the army of Alexander the Great. And when Alexander dies, his generals and his bodyguards kind of carve up the empire, and they all become kings of different places. And Patrocles winds up in the court of King Seleucus I. And the Caspian Sea is on the edge of the Seleucid Empire. And Seleucus I and his later successor and for a time co-king Antiochus I tell Patrocles, we want you to explore the Caspian Sea because we just have this little corner of it, and like, what's going on out there? And so Patrocles embarks on a pair of peripli or periplus. The word periplus is used in two very different but related contexts, and I have to define both of them here. So on the one hand, a periplus, the word is used to refer to Greek voyages of exploration, right? We're all going to get in a boat and we're going to sail in that direction and we're going to write down what we found. A periplus is the word is also used to refer to the document that was produced by this voyage of exploration, the list of what we saw. And a periplus, then, the document, is what the Hellenistic world used instead of maps. We were talking about police as a universal before in the 21st century. Now we're going to talk about maps as a universal in the 21st century. Maps, like police, are not a universal. In fact, maps, as you or I would understand them, are a pretty novel phenomenon. That is to say, it's an overhead view and it is exactly accurate, right? If you go to where, right here, on the map, you're going to find exactly that thing. When you get there in real life, the distances on the map pretty nearly correspond to distances in real life, so forth and so on. But then even maps kind of writ more broadly are also still a really don't go back as far as you might think. And we get some so-called mappa mundi, which are maps of the world, going back, 2,000 years, somewhere in that ballpark. But those were not intended to be literal depictions of geography. They were conceptual depictions at best. And, just sort of showing that these places were near these other places and abutted these other places and blah, blah, blah. You could not use these maps for navigation, and nobody would have attempted to. It would have been nonsensical. So what the Hellenistic world used in place of maps were these peripli. And what it would say is, okay, as you go clockwise around this body of water, here's what you will encounter. You will encounter this city. And you will know it's this city because this is what it looks like. And then you will encounter the mouth of this river, and you will know it's the mouth of this river because this is what it looks like. And then you'll encounter this headland, and so forth and so on, right? And to figure out what you're going to see, you find where your starting point is on this list. You put your finger on the starting point, and then if you're going to go clockwise around the sea, you go down the list. And if you're going to go counterclockwise, you go up the list. And in an era where ships did go out of sight of land, but it was much more common for them to hug the coast, this worked, in fact, better than a modern map would have worked. And so Patrocles, he produces, he conducts two peripli around the Caspian Sea, and produces two peripli, the documents. The problem is they are lies. They're just not true. They're absolutely overflowing with things that are just demonstrably untrue. And if he had actually sailed where he said he had sailed, it would have been blatantly obvious, right? The classic example, biggest example, is that he says that the Caspian Sea connects to the Northern Ocean, what we would call the Arctic Ocean. The Caspian Sea is landlocked. It doesn't connect to anything else, right? Like you can't miss that. It's not like he could have gotten to the northern end of the Caspian Sea and been like, well, I think there's an ocean there. Like, buddy, that's land. That's clearly land. He also says that the two great rivers of Central Asia, the Sir Darya and the Amur Darya, both empty into the Caspian Sea. They do not. They empty into the Aral Sea, which is a completely separate body of water that does not connect to the Caspian Sea. Like, these are just wrong. And they're wrong in a way that's surprising, because earlier geographers, and in fact, other geographers of his same era, some of them geographers in Alexander's army, people he knew personally, correctly noted that the Caspian Sea did not connect to any other body of salt water. So this was like a special error that he invented personally. And we don't have his surviving peripli. We only have other people's accounts of them in other works that have survived. So we have to go by them. And hey, if we want to be charitable, we could say something like, well, maybe Patrocles got it right and these guys misinterpreted him or something. I don't think that's terribly likely, but whatever. And these later accounts of what Patrocles had to say continued to inform European views of the Caspian Sea for centuries, right? And European geographers were often divided over whether the Caspian Sea connected to the Northern Ocean or not, because of what Patrocles had written down over 1,000 years earlier. And to me, that's absolutely wild. And in a I suppose I might as well mention what seems to me to be the most reasonable explanation of how he made these errors is that he did go on these expeditions, but he didn't go very far. Right. He just sort of relied on translators and second and third hand accounts of people he met. And many of the translations were in error, and many of the people that he talked to were wrong. And, he didn't quite get that when they said, oh, the Amur Darya and the Sir Darya flow into the salt body of water, that they were talking about a separate body of water. And because at the time that he was supposed to be making these expeditions, Patrocles had an important position as a military official in Central Asia. So I don't think it's unreasonable to speculate that he might just not have had the time to do this, to do the job properly. But from a gaming perspective, you have these you have this report, right, of a long ago voyage of discovery that some people treat as gospel. And you can have a queen say to your party, hey, I have, Patrocles, or this campaign setting's fictional equivalent of Patrocles that I'm just now mentioning for the first time because it's never been relevant before. It says that you can get into the Caspian Sea and sail up the Amur Darya River all the way to India, and it's navigable the whole way. Also, by the way, the Amur Darya, even if you start in the Aral Sea, is not navigable all the way to India. That's another just blatantly false thing. I want to launch an expedition to my campaign's fictional equivalent of India. But could you just double check, right? Because it's been 1,000 years since this was written, and the mouths of rivers move. So just head out there, find where the mouth is, make sure that everything's copacetic, and then come back. I would not necessarily encourage you to be like, and then sail all the way to India, because that's a whole campaign, right? And I like to focus on things that you can just drop in as an adventure in the campaign you're already running. Not you as a GM, you already have more campaign ideas than you know what to do with. You don't need my help on that. So okay, cool. Let's go. Let's find where the mouth of this river is. And you go there, and there is no river mouth. And it's like, okay, well, it's probably moved. And you sail up the coast and you sail down the coast, and there's no river mouth. And I'm like, okay, well, let's land. Let's talk to the people who live here. Hey guys, where's the river mouth? Man, there has never been a river mouth here. Okay, what do we do? Right. And to me, that's that. Sure, you can have adventures with krakens and so forth while you're searching for the river mouth. But then the real meat of the adventure is, now what? Right? Do we return home empty-handed? Do we say, oh, sorry, Your Highness, we couldn't find it. Could you give us a little easier assignment next time? Do you go home and you say, Your Highness, we think Patrocles is a fraud? Because Patrocles, yeah, sure, he's been dead 1,000 years, but he was a big, important fella. He probably has descendants at court who have derived some of their legitimacy from being, of the house of Patrocles. And cool, you come back and you say Patrocles is a fraud. Congratulations on all the important enemies you just made. So how do you thread this needle? What do you do with it? And to me, that's a really fun crux of adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just a ton of different ways you can do it. And of course, it could work with, 1920s, 1930s setting and science fiction as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you wouldn't be able to do it with something like the Caspian Sea in the 1920s, but sure. Certainly much of the world was still unmapped when the first satellite images started coming in. So anytime before the first satellite images, you've got large swaths of kind of your most famous example is Highland New Guinea, where it's a big old question mark. What's up there? And you can absolutely have a report from, to stick with the New Guinea example, somebody from the city-state of Makassar, wrote a report 1,000 years ago saying, oh, here's this really cool thing up in the highlands of New Guinea. And, you're in Singapore today, and you're in Singapore in the 1920s, 1930s, and somebody's like, go find the cool thing from the Makassar explorer found 1,000 years ago, and off you go. And of course, it's a fraud. And of course, in space, then you have license to go as hog wild as you want. With I found the secret hyperspace jump that leads to the fabulous riches route, and surprise, there is no fabulous hyperspace route because he was very busy and he didn't have time to do this.
Yeah. And I guess it brings up kind of a tangential issue. What about giving false information to your players? Is that something you often do, or you condone? Like, if you're, obviously this is kind of setting up a situation that you want to explore. So I get it here, but is giving false information to your players something that you condone?
What a fabulous question. Generally, I don't, because in my experience, players do that just fine on their own. They do not need my help with red herrings. They will generate 1,000 red herrings in the time it takes me to put one clue on the table, right? And I'll give you an example from a game that I played in just 2 days ago. I'm not the GM. I'm the guy generating the red herrings in this campaign. It's a Lancer campaign. We're playing the default Lancer adventure, no room for a wallflower. It's enormous fun. We're having a blast. Highly recommended. And the antagonist group in this adventure is extremely mysterious. We know very little about them. But let me tell you, my character, 100%, and Tristan Zimmerman, 50%, is convinced he knows everything there is to know about them, because based on like 3 circumstantial data points, I have constructed this vast and complex picture of what's going on. And I'm sure it's all wrong and it's all going to come crashing down. So the GM, he doesn't need to introduce a red herring. Like, I've done that for him. I'm so helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't tell you how many times I said, oh yes, the old beggar or the innkeeper or the prospector on the far planet or whatever, he tells you this thing, and I'm totally like, it's absolutely the truth. And my players are just like, I don't trust that guy. I don't believe they're right. We should go the opposite way. And you're just like, okay, go the opposite way. I told you that, he told you the truth, but okay, do that.
Now, I will point out that there can be an issue with player expectations, right? So, for example, in this Lancer campaign, this GM is perfectly willing to lie to us, right? Like, that's absolutely in his wheelhouse. He has done it in the past. It's always enormous fun. And so, A-okay. I also had a different group, and this one I was GMing for, where I introduced something that was not true, right? It was, not only was it a red herring, it was a trap, right? The villain was trying to lure the PCs to a place and trap them. And I inserted what I thought was about a million red flags, right? To say, hey, this is a trap. Please don't do the thing. And what we had was what I think was a miscommunication, right? Where that group wasn't necessarily expecting that I might provide untrue information to them. And so they went quite happily into the trap. Now, everything worked out fine, right? We all had a great time. They were very clever. They found a very clever solution. They got out of the trap, and, it was a great adventure, and like A+, hugs all around. We all had fun. But you do have to stop and consider what your players expect of you, what they expect of GMs in general. It
kind of always depends, right? I mean, it's sometimes it's, it's hard to tell because sometimes groups will be very trusting, and then there's the group that just distrust everybody, no matter how many times you tell them it's the truth. They just don't listen to you. So it can be interesting, and it puts us in all kinds of different decision, different kind of situations with role players, because and personally, I think that's part of the fun of the hobby, right? Because you never really realize, because like you said, I've set up traps before and I've been trying to be devious and they figure them out pretty easily. And then, and other times I have no traps in mind, but they are envisioning traps everywhere they go. And so, I've just learned to kind of roll with that and make sure everybody's having fun.
Yeah, and ultimately that's one of the great joys of the hobby, right? Is that if you're doing it right, you're gaming with your friends, and the social experience is to a lot of people, and I think to a certain extent I agree with this, that the social experience is more important than the storytelling experience. And
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's I agree 1,000,000%, because I can't tell you how many times that, that I've either run a session or somebody else has run a session, and, maybe it's a session that I've sat in and played. The GM is like, did I do a good job here or there? And it's just like, I think, if I was being honest, I think you botched a couple things, but like, you know what? I had a ton of fun, so I can't really complain, or I've had people give me the same feedback. It's just like, I think, this was a little confusing the way you handled this one situation, but man, the end of the day, we had a ton of fun, and this session was great, and it gave us a diversion, and we got to hang out with our friends, and we got to experience that, and everybody's happy. And I think that's just part of the game. And, I don't think we should, as players or game masters, I don't think we should expect all of our game masters to just like whip out a Shakespeare plot, after a tough day of work and dealing with family and stuff like that. So I think a little a little grace in some of those areas, and then just be willing to have fun and work with stuff goes a long way.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. All right. So we have watched the Knights, and we have possibly explored the Caspian Sea, although it could have been a fraud. And now we're going to tackle something that you were worried about, because it's kind of a big topic. This is, and it does sound a bit interesting, as I teased it before. This is a post-pirate politics concerning a seaport. And so this seems like we're going to have a bit of setup here.
Yeah. So, and while this is going to be presented as an event, I really want you to think of this as a setting, right? This is an adventure setting, because this is not something where it's like, oh, and then the party is going to stop the bad things from happening. Like, no, this is instead run the adventure you were already going to run, but this is all happening in the background, and it's affecting everything that's happening. It's complicating everything the PCs are trying to do. So the year is 1695, and the place is Surat, which is a large seaport in what is today northwest India. And at the time, Surat was part of the Mughal Empire. And the Mughal Empire at the time was one of the two greatest powers in the world in terms of wealth, in terms of culture, in terms of population. I mean, just it's difficult for us to wrap our minds today around just how big and important the Mughal Empire was in this time period compared to, especially compared to the European powers. But in Surat is a jumping off point for Indian Muslims to go on the Hajj. the pilgrimage to Mecca that pious Muslims who are able to do so should complete once in their lifetime. And the Mughal Empire is a Muslim empire. While the bulk of the population is not Muslim, the ruling class definitely is. And so the Hajj is a big deal. And every year, a treasure fleet sails from India to Mecca, carrying thousands and thousands of pilgrims and just all kinds of wealth, because the Indian Ocean is a thriving, bustling arena for trade, right? So they're stopping in all of these very important trading ports along the way to Mecca and making money all along the way. And one of the ships that is going on this year's expedition in 1695 is a ship called the Ganges Sawai. Again, apologies for pronunciation, which is a ship owned personally by the Grand Mughal himself, by the Emperor of the Mughal Empire, a man named Aurangzeb, and it is enormous. It is this enormous ship, far bigger than anything that anybody else in the world is fielding, and in come these European, these British pirates. And I think the last time I was on, we talked about these same pirates. These were the guys who stole a ship from the harbor in Spain and sailed off to the Indian Ocean. You may remember that mutiny that we talked about last time. These are the same dudes. And they meet up with a couple of other European pirate ships in the Indian Ocean. They do a bunch of awful pirate things along the coast of East Africa, and they lurk in the strait called the Bab el-Mandeb at the mouth of the Red Sea, waiting for these treasure ships, right? They're not specifically aiming for like these treasure ships, but treasure ships associated with the Hajj are known to come through the Bab el-Mandeb around this time of year. That's what they're waiting for. So we're in Surat. We're expecting the return of these treasure ships. And for the most part, they're coming in just fine, no big deal. And then one rolls in, a ship by the name of the Fath Muhammad. And the Fath Muhammad is owned by a guy named Abdul Ghaffar. And Abdul Ghaffar is absurdly wealthy. I guess I should have mentioned the East India Trading Company by this point. The East India Trading Company by this point is not this like grand, despotic, tyrannical governor of India that it will later become. It's just this little trading house. It by British standards, it's enormous and it's incredibly wealthy, but like by Indian standards, it's almost a rounding error. Abdul Ghaffar himself personally does trade equal to the whole of the East India Trading Company. And his ship rolls into town. Surat has an East India Trading Company fort in it, where the company will trade and send ships back to Britain and so forth. Fath Muhammad rolls into town and says, "Oh my God, you guys, we were attacked by British pirates." And all eyes turn to the company fort. It's like, "Hey, British pirates, you wouldn't happen to know anything about British pirates, would you? British East India Trading Company fort, would you?" And the head of the fort, technically it's not a fort, it's called a factory, because it's where a factor, a trader, sits, not because it manufactures things. The chief factor, a guy named Samuel Annesley, orders the gates to the factory closed. He's very confident that he can sit out whatever's about to happen. A lot of really angry people show up outside the gates. They don't necessarily distinguish one Brit from another. That's not necessarily surprising because A, Britain is a world away, and B, the company hasn't necessarily done a super great job of explaining the difference between the company and the British Crown and the nation of England and British people more broadly. And like, we would understand that all these are different things, but A, in 1695, these distinctions are a little more fuzzy, and B, they are certainly not well understood or appreciated in Surat, a world away from England. And so Samuel Annesley orders the gates of the factory closed. He is confident he can hold out until the head of the Mughal army in Surat, their local detachment, a guy named Ushur Beg, shows up at the factory with a column of cavalry. And he says, hey, Samuel Annesley, I have a secret message for you from the governor of Surat, the Mughal governor of Surat, but I have to tell you inside the factory. So Annesley lets him in. Ushur Beg says, surprise, it was all a ruse. You're all under house arrest. There was no secret message, or the secret message is you're all under house arrest. But everybody's fine. They're under house arrest in the factory. Everyone's safe. It's all cool. But the merchant Abdul Ghaffar, meanwhile, is screaming bloody murder. That the British are all pirates. They're all murderers. Something needs to be done. He's stirring up the crowd. There's a local cleric who's also helping stir up the crowd. And also in the crowd is this really interesting guy, a guy named Kafi Khan, who is a kind of a secret agent of the Grand Mughal, the Emperor, who the Emperor, of course, is not in Surat. He's far away. But he has these special envoys that travel throughout his empire and write down what they see. And the idea is that they are his eyes and ears. They are his unbiased reporters so that he knows what's happening in his empire. And one of these guys, Kafi Khan, is in Surat. So he's in the crowd. And he's like, oh, fellow members of this crowd, tell me what you understand. Tell me what's going on. He's writing it all down and documenting their concerns. And we have his documents. And I think that's super interesting. And it's a great source for this period. Kafi Khan is not necessarily the unbiased documenter that we might want him to be, but he's still really interesting and really useful. So the situation outside the factory is getting more and more unruly. The Mughal governor, a guy named Itamid Khan, says, okay, well, I know how I can diffuse the situation, right? I don't want unrest in my town, particularly because since I've been dragging my heels, now the population is starting to look at me and be like, why aren't you doing anything about these guys? You have them under house arrest in the factory. You could execute them anytime you wanted to. My people, I tell you what I'm going to do. Boy, I would love to do something about these guys, but I do not have the authority to do so. Ooh, my hands, they're super tied. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send a letter to the Grand Mughal in Delhi, in far off Delhi, and he will tell me what to do. And Itamid Khan's like, okay, this is going to work great because it's going to take weeks for the letter to get to the Grand Mughal. It's going to take weeks for the response to get back. And who knows how long it might take the Grand Mughal to make up his mind. And by that point, everything will have blown over. Everything will be fine. I don't have to, the East India Trading Company, I don't want to get rid of them because they're making us money. So, just play for time. I'll be fine. He doesn't get a chance to play for time because 2 days later, another ship drops anchor in Surat, and this one is the Ganj-e-Sawai, the giant treasure ship owned by the Grand Mughal himself. And they report that they were also taken by pirates. By the same pirates. And the things that these pirates did aboard the Ganj-e-Sawai are sufficiently abhorrent that I cannot repeat them on a family podcast. You will have to use your own imagination, but don't use your imagination too much because they're super duper awful. What I can say is that many of the people aboard the Ganges Sawai preferred to jump overboard and drown rather than continue to stay aboard where the pirates were doing these things. But when the pirates finished looting and performing their depredations, they, for some reason, let the Ganges Sawai go. And so she limps the rest of the way to Surat and says, hey, same British pirates. Also, some of the pirates told us that this was revenge, that they did this for revenge for a previous incident between the company and the Mughal state elsewhere. And so where before everybody with a cool head could be like, okay, look, guys, yes, they're both British, but the company and the pirates are two different people. Now the pirates themselves have said, oh, we're doing this because of the company, right? Like, oh, we got to get revenge on behalf of the company. We don't know for a fact whether anybody actually said this. We don't know for a fact whether anybody actually meant this. It's possible that some of the pirates may have been people who were besieged in Bombay when this incident happened. And now totally unrelated have become pirates. It's also possible that this was just sort of like a vague statement, kind of a remember the Maine, right? That nobody really thought too much about it when they said it. Just like, oh, yeah, we're really sticking it to you guys. Woo, Britain. But win, lose, or draw, there's no longer any way to play for time, right? Like things have really heated up. All distinction between pirate and company has vanished. Abdul Ghaffar, the merchant, is back in bed with the local clerics to whip up the crowd and demand action. Itamid Khan, the governor, stands by his pledge not to execute anybody until he's heard back from Delhi. But the house arrest is over. Everybody is all the Brits are put into a proper prison and chained up. Kafi Khan is still writing everything down like, oh, things are really unfortunate around here. Things are going real south. And then he moves on. He leaves Surat. He goes elsewhere. He goes to Bombay because he is the emperor's eyes and ears, and he goes where he pleases or where the emperor asks him to go. And he winds up in Bombay where he has a friend. And it turns out that friend is friends with a guy named John Gayer, who is the head of the entire company in India. Right, because the company has factories throughout the Indian coastline, and it just so happens that the head guy is here in Bombay and has a friend in common with Kafi Khan, the special agent. And through the special agent, Kafi Khan gets an audience, talks with this John Gayer guy, And both sides are able to talk. And Kafi Khan lays out a number of very good points. Like, for example, hey, the pirates did a great job of erasing the distinction between pirate and company. Like, you're putting a lot of hope on maintaining this distinction when the pirates don't seem to respect it. And also, the company has committed some other offenses. Most notably, they've minted coins in India, which theoretically only the emperor should be able to do. Stuff like that. The company is really shaping up to get expelled from India, right? And Kafi Khan kind of lays it all on the line, and some further back and forth happens. It's not all through Kafi Khan, but ultimately everybody comes to an agreement. The Brits, I think I mentioned this last time, the Brits do ultimately capture some of the pirates, not very many. They convict 6 of them. They hang 5 of them. This is a pretty small fraction of the number of pirates, and they had to try them twice on two separate attempts. They ultimately hanged them not for the offense of piracy, because an English jury was not able to be convinced that committing abominable acts against Indians actually constitutes a crime. But they were able to be convinced that committing mutiny is still a crime. So they hanged 5 of them for that. And that went a long way as like a good faith gesture. Like, look, we're not the pirates. We, the company, we're somebody else. The company also agreed, in order to be permitted to continue operating in India, the company also agreed to take on pirate hunting duties, right? The company would send armed ships into the Indian Ocean to hunt pirates. And this is interesting for a number of reasons. Number one, of course, is that the Grand Mughal now has a force out there hunting pirates, and that's great for him, and he doesn't have to pay a penny for it. These guys are more than happy to fund it themselves, as long as, please, sir, let me just keep trading in your incredibly wealthy ports. And this is kind of he already has a force that hunts bandits on land, that is an Indian force, not a company force, and the company basically is like, we'll be those guys, but on the ocean. But once the company starts being able to do this, now the company has state power, right? Now the company is legally given legal authority to serve as judge, jury, and executioner. That's state authority. And this is the first step in what ultimately will come to be the company ruling India, much of India, directly. And it's a very minor stepping stone, but it's the first stepping stone. I think that's super duper interesting. Ultimately, the factory in Surat reopens, everything kind of gets smoothed over. But for a while, what you have is this incredibly volatile situation on the ground in Surat, where you have a bunch of different active players. You have Kafi Khan, the special envoy. You have Itamid Khan, the governor, Ushur Beg, the very proactive head of the Mughal army in Surat. Abdul Ghaffar, the very up in arms, incredibly wealthy merchant. Samuel Annesley, the head of the factory. You've got all these interesting, colorful people, all kind of working at cross purposes to one another, against this backdrop of urban unrest. And that's where you want to set your adventure, right? So you need to go find the kidnapped child. You need to go avenge your mother's death, or heist the jewels, or blackmail the governor, or whatever you were going to do anyway. But now you need to do it in an environment where the governor has no time to talk to you because he's dealing with much more pressing matters, where Samuel Annesley, who's under house arrest in the fort, or maybe under proper arrest in a prison, has all the time in the world to talk to you, but no authority to do anything. And just everything is in a state of flux, and everything is much more complicated. You're trying to chase a guy through the streets, but here comes a mob down the street, and he disappears into the mob. And what do you do about it? And I think that Surat in 1695, as a template, right, as a template for something in your fictional campaign setting, is just really, really fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is always a challenge for game masters since we're dealing with so much other stuff. I think it is always a challenge to remember that there are other things happening in the world, and those things can be used as really good complications, really good setting backdrops. Like you were saying, like why the PCs are there, who exactly knows, but like this is just going to complicate matters, and they might get drawn into it just because maybe the mayor is like, look, if you could solve this problem, then I could talk to you, but I can't talk to you until this problem is not solved, and or whatever. And you can use that in many other ways, and it also just lends a dynamism to the setting, that there are other things happening, there are other things that are going on, and could be further complicated, I guess, with the PCs being related to the pirates, or being somewhat former involved with the pirates, or involved with somebody else. I mean, it just lends itself for all kinds of different facets.
Yeah, or like Kafi Khan, they're clients of the emperor. So they also have a dog in this fight. In fact, that's just general advice. Give the PCs a dog in the fight, whatever the fight is. Give them a personal reason to care. Tie it to their backgrounds, tie it to their ideals, tie it to the things they're pursuing. Draw them in so that they can't just ignore it. You don't want them to be like, boy, this town sure is unhappy. Well, that sounds like a town problem. On with the adventure, right? Like, no, give them hooks to why they can't just turn a blind eye.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was something I did years ago in some of my first attempts. I'm like, oh, right, my settings are kind of static, so I'll add things in the background, and then nobody did anything with them. And it's because I didn't hook them to the players at all, right? This situation will resonate with players if one of the characters was a former pirate, or if one of the characters was a former pirate hunter, or the empire they're in, whatever the cognate is, right? That empire, they don't like that empire, right? That's going to change then and color their whole view of the situation once they see people being arrested and or the governors or the people not being able to help them and stuff. That's all of that stuff is going to just influence what they are, why they're there and what their response is to this. Yeah.
Or the clerics who are also stirring up civil unrest. Maybe clerics in the exact same religious hierarchy as one of the members of the party, and it's like, oh, that's Susan. Susan was my mentor back at priest school. Well, I can't leave Susan in the lurch, so now I'm on team burn down the factory with the British inside it, right? Like, give them reasons to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you'll never be disappointed, right? You'll just never be disappointed because they're going to come up with stuff that we couldn't even really imagine. And I always love that about role-playing games. Absolutely. And there's just so much there and again, like we mentioned with some of the other settings or some of the other situations, that this will work no matter where you put it, right? This will work in whatever game you're playing. If you're playing a far future science fiction, it works. If you're playing D&D tonight, you can throw this at the seaport where the PCs are just going to arrive. I mean, you can do almost anything with this because it just works. Yeah.
One final detail that I'll throw in, since this is the second time we've talked about mobs this episode.
Oh yeah.
In my experience, you get to do mobs once per campaign. If you do mobs twice per campaign, your players lose sympathy, right? The first time it's just like, oh man, things got out of hand. Riots are the voice of the unheard. Like, I totally get it. And then the second time, in my experience, players lose sympathy. And I had a player say to me explicitly, like, why are we breaking our backs for these guys if they'll just go, stir up a mob the first time something goes wrong? And then you're like, oh, geez, well, I did want you guys to really care about this city. I did want you to be really invested in it. But now you've gone ahead and you've lost investment. Oh, dear. So my recommendation is do it once per campaign. Don't do it twice.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. I think that happens sometimes. And for whatever reason, we just get into, as a game master, we get into some kind of thing, or we have kind of a cool idea, but we forget what came before. And I think players remember repeated elements. And I think you could probably make the case with, something other than a mob as well. It's just if you put them into some other situation and you do it again, they're going to be like, isn't this the same thing? Didn't we just do this? Now are we against the mob? Or are we for the mob? I don't even know anymore, right? Like it just starts getting complicated. So I think that's great advice. All right. Well, again, we've managed to cover 3 of these incredible historic situations. And as I like to have been, I've said it last few times, it's like, if you can't find gaming material in this stuff, I don't know what I need to tell you. Isn't that right, Tristan?
You say that every time.
I know, because there is like a million ways you can use all this stuff, and it is all fascinating. And so I really do appreciate you coming on again. Tristan, why don't you just explain to people where they can find you, where they can find some of your games that you're working on, and read more history as well.
So if you want more like this, head over to moltensulfur.com. That's where I write the Molten Sulfur blog. Every week, I put out something cool from real history or real folklore, something worth learning about in its own right, because it's just so neat. And then I talk about how to file the serial numbers off of it and drop it into the campaign you're already running. I would also encourage you to check out my most recent book. Shanty Hunters is a tabletop role-playing game about collecting magical sea shanties in the year 1880. So check out Shanty Hunters and check out the Molten Sulfur blog at moltensulfur.com.
Absolutely. And as always, I will make sure there are links to your blog and to Shanty Hunters in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who is listening right now can go over there and check it out. And I would urge you to do so. You will find some excellent gaming material there. And Tristan, it was a blast to have you back on. I look forward to the next time. And thank you just for coming on the show once again.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Always a blast.
All right, there you go, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tristan today. As always, head over right now to the show notes so you can learn more about Tristan, his works, all of his articles about history, his role-playing games. Please do that. Links in the show notes. Plus, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You will get some free dungeon maps and some other free PDFs. You don't want to miss it. Head over there now. All right, now, guys, I really thank you so much for listening to the show. If you would like to support the show in some way, you can like, rate, review, or subscribe. You can also support the show financially at patreon.com/dicegeeks. And until next Wednesday, keep gaming!